We all grow up hearing the same reassuring story. The universe has a purpose, morality has a source, and somewhere beyond our limits, there's a loving mind that hears us. It's in the vows at weddings. It's whispered at hospital bedsides. It's even written into national mottos. From Ivy League philosophy seminars to courtrooms debating under God, to the chapels built into hospitals, respected institutions treat this belief with a special kind of reverence, as if questioning it requires permission. And it doesn't stop there. Polling agencies report overwhelming faith. Presidents declare it as fact. Theologians defend it with confidence. Across culture, the existence of God is often spoken about as if it were self-evident. So it's no surprise that most people assume reason will push us closer to God, not further away. The world feels designed. Consciousness feels special. Morality feels discovered, not invented. On the surface, it all seems to point upward. But here's the twist. When you actually follow the strongest arguments, carefully, step by step, all the way to their endpoints, something strange happens. Assumptions we barely notice start to collide. Definitions begin to unravel. And the obvious case for God fractures in the very places it once felt safest. That's the part almost no one tells you. Not the skeptic mocking religion, not the preacher defending it, but the hidden contradictions that appear when you take the argument seriously. And over the next few minutes, we're going to uncover them together. We'll see how cosmology, consciousness, morality, even miracle reports, arguments that are supposed to build a solid foundation, actually undermine one another. We'll watch how mystery gets smuggled in as a conclusion instead of an honest description of ignorance. And we'll expose the hidden constraints that make a personal, interventionist God not just unlikely, but logically impossible. And here's the important part. This isn't about mockery. This isn't about cheap shots. It's about consistency. Because if we're going to treat this question as the most important one a human being can ask, then it deserves more than easy slogans and moving speeches. It deserves clarity. So if you want the clean, no hand-waving breakdown, tap subscribe and save this, because the most controversial part begins now. Now here's the real question. If the case for God is so obvious, why do the definitions keep shifting under pressure? Why does the uncaused cause suddenly become a personal being when convenient? And why does the ground of existence suddenly become a father figure when comfort is needed? Let's start at the beginning. Let's look at creation itself and see where the definition trap begins. We ended the last section with a question. If the case for God is so obvious, why do the definitions keep shifting under pressure? Here's where it gets interesting. When the spotlight of evidence shines too brightly, God suddenly becomes abstract. He's no longer a being who answers prayers or gets angry. He becomes the ground of existence, or a necessary being, or the uncaused cause. Sounds sophisticated, right? But notice what just happened. That's not the God people pray to. That's not the God who watches what you eat or how you dress or what direction you face when you pray. That's a philosophical placeholder, an idea so vague it can't be tested, can't be challenged, can't be touched. And yet, when comfort is needed, when someone is in pain or searching for guidance, that same God snaps back into focus. Suddenly, he's personal again. He listens. He cares. He intervenes. It's a switch that happens so smoothly, most people never notice. But it matters because both definitions cannot be true at once. A timeless, spaceless, changeless entity cannot also be the father figure who acts in specific moments. One of these pictures must give way. Think about it. To make a choice, you need alternatives. To form a belief, you need to move from a not knowing to knowing. To act, you need to change states, from not acting to acting. But the God of philosophy is defined as changeless, timeless, beyond all sequence. So here's the problem. The very properties used to defend God's perfection are the same properties that make action impossible. If God is outside of time, he cannot decide to create at one moment rather than another. If he is unchanging, he cannot shift from not willing the universe to willing it into existence. And yet, that's exactly what every creation story depends on. This is what I call the category collision. The philosophical God, safe from scrutiny, collides head-on with the personal God of religion, and when they collide, the whole system begins to break. Now, defenders often try another move. They say, science can't explain everything. God is simply what lies beyond. But history shows what happened every time a gap gets filled. Lightning was once the wrath of Zeus. Disease was once a punishment for sin. Now we understand electricity, germs, evolution, and cosmic expansion. And each time the gap closes, the definition of God slides further back, always beyond, always just out of reach. So which is it? Is God the personal being who answers prayers? Or the untouchable abstraction that forever retreats as our knowledge grows? He cannot be both. And here's the shocker. When you try to hold the two together, the personal God of devotion and the abstract God of philosophy, they tear each other apart. The one who is perfect cannot act. The one who acts cannot be perfect. So, the very definitions used to defend belief quietly dissolve under their own weight. But maybe you're thinking, wait, even if definitions collide, doesn't the universe still need a first cause, a chooser, something to kick everything off? That's exactly where we're going next. Because when you ask what it means for a first cause to choose, to create at a specific moment rather than another, you run headfirst into a paradox you can't pray away. So maybe you're thinking, all right, fine, definitions might wobble, but surely the universe still needs a beginning, a first cause, something that pulled the trigger and set everything in motion. It's one of the oldest and most popular arguments for God. The idea that everything needs an explanation, and you can't have an infinite chain of causes stretching back forever. So eventually, you must arrive at a first cause, and that, we're told, is God. Sounds neat, sounds airtight. But when you look closely, the cracks appear fast. Here's the first problem. If this timeless, changeless being is supposed to cause a universe, we immediately run into a contradiction. Think about it. If the cause is eternal and unchanging, then the effect should also be eternal and unchanging. If God existed forever with the power to create, the universe should have existed forever too. But if the universe began at a particular moment, something changed, a choice was made, a decision occurred, and that means this so-called unchanging cause changed. The very quality meant to protect God from contradiction collapses under the weight of creation itself. That's the causal selection problem. How does a timeless being select a moment to act? To choose one time over another, you'd need a before and an after. And the moment you admit that, God is no longer timeless. Second problem, what philosophers call modal inflation. Even if you grant that something necessary exists at the foundation of reality, that doesn't mean it's a mind. It doesn't mean it has intentions or moral will or preferences. At best, it gives you something more like mathematics, like the structure of logic or the framework of physical law. But those are not people. They don't make choices, and they don't listen to prayers. Third problem, explanatory symmetry. Believers often argue, every contingent fact needs an explanation. The universe is contingent, so it must have one. But then, what about God's choices? Why this universe and not another? Why this set of laws, constants, and initial conditions instead of any other possibility? If you say God just chose it, then God's decision becomes contingent too. And if every contingent fact demands explanation, then God's choice needs one. Try to escape arbitrariness by saying it was necessary, and you erase agency altogether. God becomes less like a person and more like a brute fact, which leads us to the hidden reason most people never see. Choice without change is incoherent. Every decision you've ever made required alternatives, a before and an after, a shift from not choosing to choosing. That's what makes a decision real. But a timeless first cause can't do that. It can't move from one state to another without abandoning timelessness. And here's the shocking realization. The more you refine the argument, the more the first cause stops looking like a mind at all. It looks instead like impersonal mathematics, like the skeleton of reality itself. That's not the God of Scripture. That's not the God who comforts you in prayer. It's an abstraction dressed in divine language, and this matters because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The first cause argument doesn't land where most people think. It doesn't get you a personal deity. It gets you a bare, impersonal substrate that looks nothing like the God believers worship. But maybe there's still one escape hatch left. Maybe the universe runs on consciousness itself. Maybe minds are fundamental, and maybe God is the ultimate mind behind everything. That's the next move in the playbook. But here's the twist. When you follow the neuroscience and the logic of minds, the staircase collapses halfway up. In the last section, we saw that the first cause argument doesn't lead to a personal God. At best, it lands on something abstract, like mathematics or raw necessity. But maybe there's still a back door. Maybe the universe is built on consciousness itself. After all, you are conscious. I am conscious. Minds feel special, irreducible. So maybe God is the ultimate mind, the source of all other minds. It sounds persuasive, until you ask a simple question. What does it actually mean to think? Here's where the cracks open wide. Deliberation, the process of weighing options, only makes sense if you don't already know everything. Attention, the act of focusing on one thing instead of another, requires time, sequence, and change. And memory, the ability to store information, requires you to move from not remembering to remembering. In other words, all the things we associate with mind presuppose limitation. They presuppose ignorance. They presuppose time. They presuppose the very imperfections God is supposed to lack. Now look at what neuroscience tells us. A mind isn't magic. It's an information processing system. It requires energy. It requires updating. It makes errors, then corrects them. Your brain is constantly rewriting itself, building models of the world, predicting outcomes, discarding mistakes. That's what consciousness is. Not a static perfection, but a moving process. And here's the key. A timeless, changeless mind has nowhere to process, nowhere to update, nowhere to store. It cannot deliberate. It cannot focus. It cannot remember. So what's left? Some believers respond with a familiar line. God's thoughts are not like ours. But if that's true, then they're not thoughts. And the word mind has been emptied of its meaning. It becomes metaphor, poetry, nothing more. And with that, the very premise of a divine mind collapses. Here's the hidden reason almost no one talks about. Omniscience annihilates cognition. If you know everything, every fact, every outcome, every detail, then there is nothing to deliberate about, no question to ask, no model to update, no future to plan. All of it is already fixed. And yet to have a mind is to move through uncertainty. It is to learn, to change, to discover, to not know, and then to know. So here's the shocking realization. The more you push God to be truly mind-like, the more you are forced to give him the limits of time and change. And the more you keep him timeless and changeless, the less mind-like he becomes, until the very idea disappears. That's why arguments from consciousness backfire. They don't prove God. They quietly erase him. And this matters, because when we use the language of God as the ultimate mind, it feels comforting. It feels familiar. But under analysis, it dissolves. We're left with a contradiction, either a mind that isn't perfect or a perfection that isn't a mind. If consciousness can't save the case for God, maybe morality can. After all, if there's no God, where do right and wrong come from? That's the next step in the argument. But here's the catch. When you follow it carefully, the moral argument splits into two options, and both of them close the door. So far, we've seen definitions collapse. We've seen the first cause argument unravel. We've seen consciousness itself cut both ways. But maybe morality is the last stronghold, because even if cosmology and philosophy falter, surely we still need God to ground right and wrong. Without him, doesn't morality become subjective? Doesn't it collapse into opinion? That's the appeal of the moral argument. But when you press it, the road splits into two paths, and neither leads where believers expect. Here's the first path. If morality is simply whatever God commands, then morality becomes arbitrary. If God says kindness is good, then it's good. But if God decreed cruelty, then cruelty would also be good. That means, at least in principle, genocide, slavery, or torture could become moral simply by decree. And that collides with our deepest intuitions. Most believers reject it instantly. They say, no, God would never command evil. But notice what that response admits. It admits there is a standard above God's will, a standard by which we can judge his commands. And that takes us to the second path. Maybe God doesn't create morality. Maybe he simply recognizes moral truths that exist independently. But if that's the case, then morality doesn't depend on God at all. It exists with or without him. And our access to it through empathy, cooperation, game theory, harm reduction requires no divine lawgiver. That's the fork. Either morality is arbitrary or morality is independent. There is no third road. And here's the hidden problem. If God is supposed to be omnibenevolent, then his goodness either collapses into preference or becomes redundant. If goodness is just whatever he prefers, then morality is no more than divine taste. If goodness is defined by standards beyond him, then morality outranks God, and he's no longer the source. Both outcomes undercut the very idea of a sovereign moral deity. Now zoom out and notice how religions actually work in practice. The structure of morality often looks less like truth and more like a system of incentives. Obey, and you receive eternal reward, paradise, pleasure, bliss without end. Disobey, and you face eternal punishment, torment, fire, separation, suffering forever. It's the same logic as reward and punishment in everyday life, just scaled up to infinity. And yes, it's effective for control, but effective doesn't mean true. When you strip away the reverence, what you see is a psychological mechanism, fear and desire driving behavior. It's transparent, it's powerful, but it doesn't tell us anything about moral truth itself. And here's the "I had no idea" moment. The most popular moral pathway, the one countless sermons and books depend on, cannot land on a God who is both sovereign and good without contradiction. You have to choose. And whichever way you choose, God is either arbitrary or unnecessary. This matters because morality feels like one of the most personal arguments. We want our sense of right and wrong to point upward, but the logic shows it points somewhere else, toward human empathy, social cooperation, and the realities of harm and well-being. So if morality doesn't clinch the case for God, what about miracles? What about revelation? Those claims of divine fingerprints breaking into history. Surely testimony carries weight. Surely stories of the extraordinary can't all be dismissed. But when you examine miracle claims the same way courts examine evidence, belief pulls a vanishing act. If morality doesn't close the case, maybe miracles will. Because here's the thought, evidence doesn't just live in books or theories, it lives in experiences, testimonies, stories, and millions of people will tell you with sincerity that they have witnessed something beyond the natural order, a healing, a vision, a sign. But here's the uncomfortable part. When you test miracle claims by the same standards we use in courts, in laboratories, or in historical research, they don't survive. Let's start with the basics. Miracles are defined as low probability events, things that shouldn't happen by natural law. But human observers are error-prone. We misremember, we exaggerate, we see patterns that aren't there. Now add in group pressure, religious authority, and the excitement of expectation, and suddenly false positives multiply fast. That's not cynicism, it's psychology. And it means personal conviction, however sincere, is not the same thing as reliable evidence. Now look at underdetermination. For any miracle story you pick, there will always be multiple competing explanations. Memory distortion, selection bias, fraud, or simply misidentifying a natural cause as a supernatural one. And here's the kicker. Those alternatives carry a higher probability than the laws of nature were suspended by a deity. That doesn't mean people are lying. It means our brains are vulnerable, and history is full of examples that prove it. Here's the hidden dynamic most people miss: selective confirmation. When a healing happens, it's publicized as proof of divine power. When the healing fails, the explanation shifts. Not enough faith, wrong attitude, God's mysterious plan. In other words, successes are counted, failures are explained away. And that's exactly the pattern psychologists find in folklore, urban legends, and conspiracy theories. Now compare this to the standards of authority we trust elsewhere. In a court of law, you need a chain of custody. Every piece of evidence must be traceable, documented, verified. In scientific labs, results must be reproducible, no exceptions. In historical study, sources are cross-checked, weighed, and tested against context. But miracle claims rarely supply that kind of rigor. At best, we're given anecdote, passed down, filtered through translation, and often separated from the original event by decades or even centuries. And here's the "I had no idea" moment. The more carefully you test miracle reports, the less they resemble divine fingerprints. and the more they resemble the exact storytelling mechanics mapped out by psychology. They follow the same rules of rumor, the same biases of memory, the same patterns of selective reporting. Which means miracle testimony doesn't add weight to the case for God. It actually exposes how fragile our standards become when belief takes priority over evidence. So if cosmology, consciousness, morality, and miracles all collapse under scrutiny, if the main roads don't reach God, what exactly are we left with? That's where everything comes together. Because in the final step, we reach the uncomfortable synthesis. The very attributes required for God cancel the very behaviors believers need. We've walked through every major road: cosmology, consciousness, morality, miracles. And when you put them all side by side, a strange picture emerges. The arguments don't reinforce each other. They undo each other. Think about it. The God of timeless perfection collides with the God of action. The first cause that chooses is no longer immutable. The omniscient mind erases the very machinery of thinking. The moral lawgiver is either arbitrary or unnecessary, and the miracle-working God fails under the same standards that protect truth everywhere else. One by one, each path collapses. And when you combine them, the contradictions sharpen. Each solution breaks a different attribute. And what remains isn't the personal, interventionist God most people pray to, but an impersonal structure, a bare necessity, something that doesn't love, doesn't choose, doesn't speak. And here's the part most people never hear. This isn't about mockery, it's about consistency. Because the more rigor you demand, the more the case for a personal God dissolves under its own definitions. Not because science is hostile, not because skeptics are cruel, but because the logic simply won't hold together. And if the comforting picture dissolves, the natural question is, what replaces it? That's where the real work begins. Because rejecting contradictions doesn't leave you empty. It leaves you free. Free to build meaning without manipulation. Free to find wonder in reality itself, the stars, the mind, the connections we make with each other. Free to stand in awe of a cosmos that isn't built for us, and yet still gives us the chance to create purpose together. And maybe that's the point. Not to be handed meaning by authority, but to make it with honesty, curiosity, and courage. So if you want part 2, how to rebuild meaning without metaphysics, drop a comment with the toughest question you want answered, and share this with someone who will push back. Because the conversation doesn't end here. It only begins when you ask, what comes after God?